Nadia Carter only wanted a quiet drink. She slipped into Bulldog's den as the sun dipped low, the bar's wooden door groaning like it carried all the weight of the regulars inside. The air was thick with smoke and stale beer. Country songs humming from a jukebox that had seen better decades. She didn't stand out at first glance, just a woman in a white tank top, scarred shoulder catching the light, moving with quiet ease toward the far end of the counter. But Nadia wasn't ordinary. 20 years of Delta Force service lived in her bones. Every step measured, every glance calculated. She ordered whiskey neat, her tone calm, her movements unhurried. From the mirror behind the bottles, she watched the whole room without turning her head. 3 bikers at the pool table, couples tucked into booths, a lone drunk at the bar's far end. And then came the sound, the heavy slam of boots, the jingle of chains. The Iron Dogs MC had arrived. Ray Bulldog Maddox led the pack, filling the doorway with his hulking frame, leather vest stretched tight, his reputation hanging in the air like smoke. Assault charges, suspected drug ties, always untouchable thanks to friends and law enforcement. He saw Nadia and smirked. Trouble was coming. His crew spread out, their laughter sharp, mean. The bar's regulars shrank into silence, the bartender busying himself with spotless glasses. Nadia sat still, sipping her whiskey, her reflection catching Bulldog's steady approach. His shadow fell over her as he leaned in. "Don't usually see your kind in my bar," he said, loud enough for his men to snicker. She ignored him. His hand hovered, rings gleaming under the light, before he slapped her hard, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Laughter roared from his crew. Bulldog spread his arms, waiting for humiliation to take its place on her face. Instead, Nadia moved. One fluid motion, one pivot, and his wrist was locked in her grip. Pressure points crushed, momentum stolen, his knees buckling as she forced him down. The bar went silent. Bulldog, the terror of the county, knelt before a woman half his size. She leaned close, her voice icy steel. "Touch me again, and you won't be using that hand." Then she released him, calm as ever, turning back to her glass while the room stared in shock. Bulldog scrambled up, humiliated, rage burning his face. He barked at his crew, but they hesitated. They'd just seen their leader dismantled in seconds. Nadia laid down her cash, paid for her drink and his too, then walked out through a crowd that parted for her like water. Bulldog's threats followed her into the night, but they sounded weak in the open air. Still, when she reached her home later, the warning was clear. Red spray paint dripping across her garage door. "You are dead." She stared at it, jaw tight, anger sharpening to cold resolve. This wasn't fear. This was war. The next morning, Nadia tried the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wilkes, overweight, smug, his badge gleaming like cheap armor, barely looked at her. When she described the assault and the threat, his smirk widened. "Bulldog's just a good OL boy having fun," he said. "Maybe you overreacted." When she pressed, his mask slipped entirely. "Maybe if you people knew your place, this wouldn't happen." That was all she needed to know. The law wasn't on her side. She walked out, boots clicking on the linoleum, leaving Wilkes to rot in his own corruption. But Nadia wasn't alone. At the veteran shelter where she worked, word spread. Marcus, a young mechanic with grease on his shirt and loyalty in his bones, pulled her aside. He'd seen Bulldog's crew circling the shelter at night. It wasn't just about her anymore. They were targeting the people she cared about, the broken soldiers finding hope under her roof. That night, 5 bikers showed up, circling like predators. Bulldog demanded her submission, sneering about her charity house. Nadia stood between them and the sheltered door, her voice steady. "You mistake fear for respect." Something in her gaze made even his men hesitate. They left, but the threat was carved deep. The shelter fire came days later. Flames lit the night sky, swallowing everything they'd built. Veterans coughed smoke. Paramedics worked frantically, and Marcus lay burned but alive, whispering through pain, "Don't let them win." Standing in the ashes at dawn, Nadia knew the time for patience had ended. She opened her wooden box of Delta Force medals, reminders of who she was, and told her veterans the truth. She trained elite operators to survive when outnumbered and surrounded. Now she would train them. They weren't victims, they were soldiers again. The yard behind the shelter became a training ground. Veterans who had slumped under the weight of trauma found their footing again, rediscovering balance, timing, unity. They practiced escapes, holds, teamwork. Fear was replaced by focus. Together, they planned surveillance, cameras, documentation. Nadia led them through reconnaissance of Bulldog's compound drug shipments, trafficking victims, guard routines. She gathered evidence with military precision. Every face, every license plate, every box photographed. When the night came, her team moved like shadows. Cameras hidden, engines disabled, shipments recorded. And when Bulldog charged at her with a knife, she put him face down in 3 seconds, zip ties clicking shut around his wrists. Marcus' voice crackled in her earpiece. Got it all on camera. Every second. The FBI arrived before dawn. Agent Cooper leading the raid with federal warrants. Bulldog and his gang were hauled away, their crimes documented beyond denial. Sheriff Wilkes, too, was cuffed, sputtering as his corruption files came to light. The veterans stood together, soot-streaked but proud, as their town finally breathed free air. Reporters tried to spin it, but the truth was clear. A community of veterans had taken down the fear that ruled them. Months later, the shelter stood rebuilt bigger, stronger, filled with new programs and laughter. Townsfolk who once looked away now brought food, supplies, and open respect. The bar where it all started had been cleaned up, renamed simply the Den, its walls lined with photos of service. Not intimidation. Nadia returned sometimes, sitting on her stool, whiskey neat in hand. People nodded when she entered, not out of fear, but out of admiration. She'd reminded them what one person could do and what many could accomplish together. The fight had begun with a slap, but it ended with justice and a community that refused to be broken ever again. Before you go, comment where you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because tomorrow's is one you won't want to miss.